Channel Zero is a new horror anthology series on the Sci-Fi Channel. It began airing Tuesday, October 11th and bases its stories off of well-known creepypastas. Every 6-episode season bases itself off a new pasta, and for their first season, they're doing Candle Cove. Today I'll be covering the second episode, I'll Hold Your Hand. This episode takes a major departure from the original Candle Cove story, so spoilers ahead for those who haven't seen the episode. After a recap of the previous episode's events, our story begins with an old man walking through the wilderness and stumbling across a tree filled with the corpses of children, the victims of the Iron Hill murders. It cuts to a news broadcast, but then the screen transitions into an episode of Candle Cove. Pirate Percy's on the laughingstock while Horace Horrible tries to convince him to go inside the big spooky cave. We then get a transition to show that Katie, the little girl who got lost in the last episode, is watching the show, and Horace Horrible is talking directly to her. He tells her to look under her bed and come back to them in the cave. Immediately afterwards, a horrifying scream is heard, and we find out that Katie has stabbed her brother Dane, you know, the David Bowie kid, with what looks like a large meat hook, although the act isn't shown on screen. The mother Jessica calls up Mike, who has left Iron Hill and is staying in a hotel, and asks him to come back and talk to Katie. Gary, her husband, and the sheriff, doesn't trust him though, and still thinks he had something to do with her disappearance, but reluctantly lets him talk with her. Mike shows up at the hospital and sees a drawing that he thinks Katie drew of the laughingstock near a cave in a railroad track. We then transition to Mike's mother, who is seen showing up at a TV broadcasting station and asks about Candle Cove. The guy she talks to is pretty knowledgeable and has even made his own Candle Cove fan films. He even refers to them as fan fiction, but he doesn't have any concrete information. The show never aired on the same station and was never recorded, but he confirms that it did exist as he saw it when he was a kid. I really thought they were going to try and pull some shit like this guy was the mastermind behind the whole Candle Cove thing, like he made the show because he acts like a huge creepy weirdo, but no, nothing like that happens. We get right back to Mike talking to Katie, and he asks her about the drawing, but she's not saying much. He starts to hallucinate, seeing her as Eddie, and asks where she went. She replies that Mike's been there too, a cave they used to go to, and a boy was there with her. A boy who was underground for a long time, but someone put him in the cave. Mike asks who put him there, but Katie just says he has to go inside before Gary comes in and stops Mike from asking any more questions. Next, one of the police officers, Amy, who was in the last episode, comes to a woman whose house has been robbed, but only of one item, an old box that she used to keep some junk in, including her son's baby teeth. Afterwards, Mike's daughter calls him and checks up on him, but also tells him that he has to go inside, and then she snaps out of it right afterwards and just goes back to a normal conversation. We get the revelation that she's not really supposed to be talking to Mike, so we can assume that the relationship that Mike has with his family isn't very good after his psychotic episode. Mike's mother then comes over and sees the drawing Katie made and immediately recognizes the location, an old mining facility that Mike and Eddie used to play at, and then they go immediately to explore it. We get some background on Mike and his mother before they reach the facility, and then Mike enters and wanders around for a while before coming across what looks like a shrine, complete with candles, around the corpse of Eddie. Police show up and Mike's mother is understandably devastated and Mike seems to be in shock. After some flashbacks to Mike and Eddie and Mike's mother crying in the background, Mike hallucinates a life-size Horace Horrible puppet, which is kind of freaks out. It's a freaky thing that happens. He then talks to his mother and drops the bomb. He's the one who killed Eddie. He stabbed him in the chest with the very same meat hook that Katie used to stab her brother and buried his body in the woods. But someone else dug him up and stole his body and placed it inside the mining facility. Because he's talking like a crazy person who murdered his brother, his mother loses her shit and slices his hand open with a knife just to get away from him. Soon after, Gary comes to get Mike after his mother talks to him. Mike thinks he's under arrest, but he's taken to an unknown location away from the police station. The last scene in the episode is an old woman that Mike's mother talked to a few times in the episode. A mother who lost her son during the murders, feeding the stolen teeth from earlier to the horrible tooth monster from before. And that's where it ends off. While this episode brought a lot to the table in terms of progressing the plot, it still felt a lot like filler. There's still a general lack of scary moments, but based on the preview for the next episode, that's likely to change. The pacing in this episode seemed much slower than the previous, which was already pretty slow and something I forgot to bring up in the last episode. Like for instance, the scene where Mike is walking through the mining facility is tense, but it goes on for a bit too long. There's not much to say here because this feels like another expository episode, and I really hope we can get into the real meat of the story soon, because the direction it's taking is interesting, although I'm seeing some signs of what I was worried about earlier with the show being too insidiously evil. Horace Horrible made a little girl stab her brother with a meat hook. You don't get much more evil than that. Other than that, still great camera work, good lighting. This is still a really well-made show. As far as acting goes, Mike's mother was fantastic this episode. and you could really feel the anguish when she talks about Eddie and finds his body, and the fear and betrayal when Mike reveals that he killed him. As for Mike himself, I thought he seemed really flat and monotone this episode, and it was something I was going to bring up as a point of complaint, but the fact that he delivered his reveal of murdering Eddie in the same way he did all of his other dialogue made him really feel like an insane murderer and enhanced the scene a lot for me. The show's still looking good so far, and I don't think I have much else to say on this episode, so thanks for watching. Tune in to Channel Zero on Sci-Fi if you haven't seen it yet, and tune in here next week for more reviews. Until then.